Good morning, everyone. So this morning, we're going to be doing the Seeds 101 portion of our webinar series, Introduction to Seed Storage and Stratification. In overview, we'd like to welcome you to our second in our series. We're going to be going over the storage and stratification requirements of some seed groups and how to do this easily at home. We will look into the use of fall planting in traditional growing beds and also winter sowing into containers. Further into the spring and summer, we're going to be running webinars on forecasting, collections, and processing methods, as well as Reforest London will be leading a series of hikes focused on forecasting and considering species for collections. The Million Tree Challenge. It's a community-wide initiative to inspire Londoners to plant 1 million new trees across the city. Reforest London is proud to be a founding partner with the City of London. As a community and as a city, we need to work together to improve the environmental and human health. Seedlings grown through our seed programs will be used in a variety of Million Tree Challenge initiatives, such as the Neighborhood Relief and seedling giveaways. With more than 490,000 trees planted and registered so far, we expect to reach the 500,000 mark this summer. So if you planted any trees or shrubs at your home since 2011, register them at milliontrees.ca. Beginning with the ethics in seed collection, to act with fairness and in the interest of the sustainability of existing habitats, to act with respect for the land, the landowners, and other caretakers of these habitats, only taking what is needed and leaving the vast majority of seed for natural dispersal within the landscape, and ensuring appropriate seed collection techniques are used. Very specifically, this means do not enter private property without permission, respect all posted signage, get permission and guidance from the landowners and caretakers of the property where the plants are growing, and understand the legal protections surrounding our species at risk in Ontario, taking care to avoid damaging sensitive habitats and ongoing restoration efforts. Meeting a seed's needs. To learn about what a seed will need growing on, it's helpful to look at the condition its parent plants thrive in. Most seeds will germinate well in the parent plant's natural setting. This is in part presuming that the parent plant itself was grown from seed in that environment and that its environment hasn't changed significantly since it was germinated. Plants that are intentionally transplanted are less informative in this respect, but often if the parent plant is healthy and vigorous, you can learn about some of its needs that are being well met. Other observations about the seed in its natural environment that are good to consider is, does the seed fall to the ground or is it retained until spring in the trees? Do animals eat them or stash them? Research the plants you would like to grow and collect. Find out more about the recommended seed processing well before you ever have the seeds in your hands. Clearly label your seeds and take note of when you apply different treatments and processes. And as always, documentation is important for both successes and failures. Storage and viability. Seed storage needs to be done in ways that support the greatest viability and vigor in the seedlings grown. This varies according to type, but can be broadly grouped. The very fastest way to damage seeds is to collect them and leave them in an enclosed container in a hot car. You are far better off collecting in cloth bags or open buckets and leaving them tucked into the shade if you have to stop anywhere after leaving a collection site. Most seeds typically require some processing in their first 24 hours. Berries may ferment if the fruit is left on them. It's usually best to remove the fruit or at least get them into a fridge for a day or two until you can do so. Cones, pods, and catkins must be dried. Laying them out on old window screens or spreading them out on sheet pans in areas with good ventilation are ways to ensure that these seeds dry down so that they can be properly stored without molding. And finally, some examples at the bottom. Nuts, excuse me, nuts need their moisture preserved. The best way to do this is to store them for no more than a week in a Ziploc bag in the fridge until you're ready to either plant them into pots or beds for the winter, fall and winter, or to add some damp sand or soil mix to stratify in the fridge until you are ready to plant them out in spring. What's in a good label? Good labeling can tell you a lot at a quick glance. A label should be attached securely in some way to the seeds throughout the whole process, from collections to seed treatments, and eventually when growing them on as plants. When seeds are forecasted for or collected, take a photograph of the site. This can allow you to later note the geographic coordinates that are included in most images. If you're taking them with your phone, you'll need your phone's location services active and your collection to have the correct permissions selected to record this. The label that you can fit on a plant tag is going to be much shorter than what you can fit on a storage bag. Plan ahead, make sure to make the most of the room you have. At a minimum, you want to include species, genus, and common name. Best practice would also include details like date collected, location collected, as well. Good additional details are processing dates, planting dates, and number planted. All of the above should be recorded in some manner, whether it's on a book or in a computer for future reference. Triggers for germination. There are many different seeds with many different needs, but the most common triggers for germination are warm and cold cycles, moisture, sunlight, fire, digestion, or there's a few that benefit from fermentation or microbial actions. Most native tree species in Ontario benefit from some form of cold stratification. Trees and seeds that fall in the autumn and start growing immediately would have very little chance to set down roots, photosynthesize, and create the kind of energy reserves needed to survive the winter. And then before growing again next spring, and then begin growing again next spring. It is far better to wait until the cold has come and gone before starting to consume all the resources that exist within a seed. Other seeds wait for opportunities. This could be a tree falling and lifting up the leaf litter and opening a patch of sunlight that gives plants their window to grow, while others flourish to astonishing growth after a fire is burned through an area, clearing the way and increasing the available carbon in the soil. The seeds and fruit can find their way traveling many miles from a parent plant, while digestive processes thin or abrade seed coats that have been evolved to survive the trip from one end to the other. What's going on inside a seed? One of the first things to focus on when looking inside a seed is to understand what a cut test is showing you. A cut test, literally cutting a seed in half, usually lengthwise, is to evaluate the condition of the various layers inside. This is done on a number of seeds, ideally, to give a collector a rough idea of the percentage of seed that is viable and likely to grow. If say 4 of 5 acorns cut in half show weevil damage, like the lower nut on the left of the screen, it would not be a good tree to collect from. It takes the same amount of time, effort, and materials to harvest and process a good healthy crop as it does to collect seed that will be unable to grow. So this information is very important. It's literally looking inside to see how things are. Learning about the layers of protection, it varies by seed, but you've got the fruit, shells, seed coat, and embryo. We can learn a bit about how these layers have developed in ways that protect the seed and also support the success of distribution and germination. Each layer may also factor into germination inhibition. Sometimes this is with thick and tough seed coats that need to be in a wet environment for a long time to soak enough water to trigger germination, or it can be chemicals which prevent germination until certain environmental factors have been met within the seed embryo. So simulating natural conditions. The main groups are warm and cold cycles, and we call this stratification. Hydration, so by soaking seeds. Fire, we do with a boiling water soak. Sunlight is strong light exposure. Ingestion and digestion can be mimicked with grit bags or scarification. And fermentation and microbial actions are allowing limited fermentation, or in some cases, an acidic soaking on seeds. Warm and cold stratifications, they are sometimes used, they're often in combination, but they come in sort of 4 general categories: dry and warm, dry and cold, moist and warm, and moist and cold. So for dry and warm, I would recommend storing in open jars or buckets or paper bags in a area that is either room temperature, or if you have a basement sort of cold room that stays around 15 degrees, that would also be fine. Dry and cold is well and thoroughly dried and then stored in sealed mason jars in the fridge. You could use plastic bags as well. If you're using mason jars, you can sometimes also add desiccant packets to maintain the dryness of the seed to avoid any loss due to molding. Moist and warm, stored in sealed bags or jars with moist sand or soil mix, just at room temperature, as I say, probably not lower than 15 degrees if you're storing it in a basement or cold room. Moist and cold, stored sealed in bags or jars, again with moist sand or soil in a fridge. All right, introducing moisture. Soaking seeds to break the dormancy and soften the seed coat. Seeds that have evolved in areas with consistent moisture in the spring often benefit from a good soaking. 24 hours in a lidded glass jar is usually enough, but there are some species that may need longer. Using fire in a contained household way, we recommend bringing a kettle full of water to a boil and having prepared some clean and pre-warmed heat-safe jars. Apply the labels to the jars, add the seed to the bottom. When the water's boiling, pour the boiling water over the seed, mostly filling the jars, and allow to soak for 24 hours. Mimicking fire's steam and wet heat produced in the soil can trigger germination in some seeds. These seeds will often lie dormant for many years in the soil's seed bank. This trigger benefits some pioneering tree and shrub species by being among the first plants to grow up and growing in the newly enriched, low competition and open to sunlight areas left behind in the wake of fires. Fires are an important natural process, and their impact or removal from the landscape can be significant. In the picture of the seeds at the bottom, these are honey locust seeds. I was going to say, you can see the label on the jar on the right as well. This picture shows seeds where we didn't use enough hot water to sustain the hot temperature long enough. The second batch of seeds we did with a fully filled 750 milliliter jar resulted in a much better success in swelled seeds. We had about 85% swelled seeds. The seeds that readily uptake the water are the ones with the best germination success. It doesn't mean that the ones that didn't swell won't germinate, just less of them on average. So it's important to give them enough heat to break down the seed coats and allow them to absorb the water. And they generally about triple in size. All right, ingestion and digestion. Scarification, so we do this usually by filing through the seed coat. And grit bag treatments, we're going to talk a lot about that because they're really useful for seeds that have fleshy fruit around them. The process of chewing and digesting seeds by birds and animals. They're often unable to digest the actual seeds they consume. The highest food value stuff is the fleshy fruit surrounding the seed. For seeds, however, the abrasive nature of chewing and being ground in crops with gravel helps to break down the tough seed coats just enough that they can have a better chance at germination when they're deposited on the ground with a beneficial dollop of organic matter. There are quite a few trees in North America that are believed to have been consumed by megafauna, such as the now extinct mastodons. These creatures were capable of grinding and chewing through tough seed coats, thus stimulating their germination. Today, seeds with amazingly tough seed coats can be chewed on at home with a common wood or nail file. I run the corner of a square file through a seed until it's filed just deep enough to expose a peak of the lighter seed inside. that then usually seeds with a very tough seed coat are then also subjected to a soak for 24 hours. Grit bag process. Starting from the top left with freshly gathered rough leaf dogwood seeds, add 2 to 3 times the volume of sand to your seeds. A small bit of water. In this case, you can see in the top, it is far too much liquid. It's also good to know that some juicy seeds will add in a lot of liquid to the mix when they're ground, making your grit too diluted to grind well. We found this especially true with high bush cranberry. Press and squashing the bag together grinds the sand against the seeds and really doesn't take very long to do quite a number of seed. We dump the slurry into a bucket with water, skim off any fruit we can, mindful that we don't gather the seeds. While usually a floating seed or nut means it's unlikely to germinate, many dogwoods have one empty seed chamber that helps them float downstream to a new location. Straining and sorting the seeds, and for dogwood, we then began their warm and wet stratification process that will be later followed by cold and wet. This series of treatments is very reflective of the fruit, what the fruit from a wetland species could expect. All right, so for natural stratification and planting seeds in beds, it's best used for trees and shrubs with significant taproots. How to prepare a good seed bed. Raised beds are not required, but they can be helpful in some situations when securing protective fencing. You're going to remove the turf layer and tarp to smother existing vegetation. If the vegetation where you want to establish a seed bed contains invasive plants, a multi-year process might be needed to get the bed that doesn't compete too heavily with our native species. A small bed could be maintained by hand with some diligence, but a larger one would present challenges to keep in check while still caring for seedlings. Be aware of your soil's existing seed bank. The seed bank in our soil is a collection of all the seeds that have fallen and not yet grown. Anytime you open up a new space or turn over soil, these seeds have the opportunity to grow in the newly available ground. Some seed can live a very long time in the soil, so there may be times when you find plants popping up that are entirely unexpected to you, but may belong to previous ecosystems. More often, prolific plants and many invasive plants will seed so heavily into the soil bank, it feels like the cat that keeps coming back. In general, for our region, a slightly sandy soil is better than heavy clay, as there's less damage in transplanting from a freely moving soil. So slightly sandy it has less nutrients, but it's gentler. When you're growing on seedlings, they're eventually going to be moved out. Then they suffer less root damage in a soil that's easier to take them out of. Mulch everywhere with leaves or between the rows with wood chips. Most Londoners will want to mix some loam or sand into their soil if it is quite heavy. I've planted at sites in London where the soil at first glance would make a better ceramic pot than a growing medium. And while plants can get established and do very well in clay, it can be challenging, and especially when we're looking at the likelihood of relocating these seedlings, from growing at like a high density to out in their eventual site. At household scale, composted leaf litter is free for the asking. Talk to your neighbors, ask nicely. Most people are happy to have it gone. And can be gardener's gold to help open up heavy clays. You can compost large amounts in mounds or just top dress and let the soil life mix it into the soil for you. Also, St. Julian Park has a depot of coarse wood chip mulch, usually available freely to London residents. Bring your own shovel, garbage cans, or other containers. Most seeds well suited for direct sowing are also very tolerant of a moderately heavy leaf litter and can benefit from the lack of competition. When top dressing with leaves, make sure that the leaves are not entirely composted of walnut. Juglone is an inhibitor to seeds, but it also breaks down rapidly when properly composted. So it's not that it can't be used, it's just you want to take into consideration how you're using it. Label, label, always label. Also have a planting map as insurance if labels go missing or get relocated. Plant your freshly collected nuts or soft maples, the spring fruiting like red or silver, into rows or blocks, depending on how long they will be in place before transplanting. You can protect seeds and seedlings, especially nuts over the winter, typically with a wire mesh that's pinned down. Some rodent damage is still to be expected. Most natural deterrents will only last for short periods of time, so applications of bone and blood meal or ferret waste would all need to be reapplied regularly, and losses will still happen. Pros and cons of seed beds. Pros, it's high density, there can be very low infrastructure cost, low impact and small footprint. It makes for some really well adapted seedlings to the environment that you're growing them in. It can be low maintenance, and it has the most reasonable watering needs because it takes advantage of the water that the rain and in the soil. Natural stratification and germination, so you don't have to use up fridge space or other methods. The downsides to it, the initial setup can be really time intensive. Seed banks can cause competition. Ergonomics, because it's in ground, you have to sort of plan for that, whether it's kneeling pads or you know, getting assistance for different things. Rodent and deer pressures are always a concern. Wire mesh, if used, has some costs, and they're exposed directly to extreme weather events. So windstorms, hail, they're really hard to protect in-ground beds from. You can, but it's more work than just relocating pots if you know terrible weather is coming. Seeds requiring long stratification or double dormancy may take up to 2 or 3 years to sprout. So that's a lot of time to maintain that planted area. All right, winter sowing. We have a little video here about winter sowing and how to do it. And I'm just going to start it here. Oh, apologies. So we're starting our planting here with 15 rough leaf dogwood seeds. I've got the tag here that'll go inside the pot. I've got some pre-mixed soil mix, moistened and ready to plant, and a couple 4-liter water containers. I find these are a really good size, and you can usually find someone willing to give them to you. So I punch through it. I'm just going to pretend with the scissors and then cut around the widest part of the container. We remove the lids. We sometimes use those in other projects. And I'm going to set this aside because I've got one already cut here. So it shows how they're cut and how we are going to fit them together eventually. But I've got to take this off, and we have to drill some drainage holes in the bottom. I'm going to do about 5 in the video. For a planter this size, I would recommend at least 10, maybe a few more. I prefer to do them with a hot point or a soldering iron because it makes a somewhat reinforced hole, but it's important to do that outside because plastic fumes are not good for us. So I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to fill it about 10 centimeters deep, which is about 1/3 of the way in the case of this container. You shake the soil in nice and loosely. When I grab the soil and squeeze it sort of into a ball, it doesn't drip, and as you can see, it just holds its shape fairly nicely. It's just moist enough to hold together. It gives a nice damp medium for the seeds to start growing in. So fill that up, give it a few tamps, sort of like flour. We're trying to remove any air pockets that might be there because when root systems grow into air pockets, they stop growing and have to find a new way. I'm going to make dimples all around the edge. I'm going to have 10 around the outside edge and 5 in a ring just inside of that, leaving the center empty because where the funnel fits in, the water will rain down and could displace seeds initially and would be pounding down on the seedlings the rest of the time. So these seeds are about 5 millimeters wide. So seeds generally want to be planted at twice their thickness. So we're planting these about a centimeter deep and into all the dimples. And it does not take very long to plant all 15 seeds. So I'm going to press down the soil around that's raised up from doing the dimples and sprinkle a small amount of soil over the top just to make sure everyone's well covered and level it. Now, some winter sowing, you're trying to build a small greenhouse, so you'd tape around the outside here. For native seedlings, we don't really need that, and I find watering them to be a big challenge like that. So if we flip this like a funnel, it makes it much easier for rain to come in and put a nice heavy rock in it just so the top doesn't get displaced. And they're easier to water and manage, and there's better airflow in and out because it's not a sealed container. And the last thing to say about that is I would say to open the tops when there's no risk of frost. So in our region, you're looking sometime after May 2-4. By then, there's enough other plant life that the rabbits and deer are not likely to eat all your young, tasty seedlings. And the heat buildup can be quite considerable as we swing into late May and early June. So here again is pictured just with static pictures, the steps that we use to do this. So winter sowing and growing in containers. We've got the 4-liter container, a pair of scissors. I remove the top ring at the indent, making what looks like a funnel and a tall cylinder. Drill some holes in the bottom, seed the seeds, make sure it's well labeled. And in the last picture on the bottom right, that is it out in the snow in our compound with some roughly 1 centimeter wire mesh over the top of it so that rodents don't go in and snack on the seeds that we've planted for the winter. So using this natural stratification, planting in seeds in pots and containers. It's commonly called winter sowing. It's best used for trees and shrubs with moderate or fibrous root systems. Be aware of your soil's existing seed bank if you're using local soil, or choose a free draining, moisture retaining soil to ease on your watering needs. Always ensure to label your plantings properly. There are opportunities here to reuse planting pots, pop bottles, yogurt tubs, or boards. It's just always important to manage and make sure that you have good drainage. If there's torrential rain, you need a way for that water to get through. Plant freshly collected seeds. Ensure they're watered according to their need until winter sets in. So if you're planting them as soon as you collect them in the fall, you may need to water them a few times through the fall season, especially if we have a very warm fall, because the seeds still have moisture needs, and with them not being attached to the ground soil, they can dry out. Stratification should occur naturally in species that are appropriate for this the following spring. Cold frames can be a great way to protect seedlings through the first few years in pots. Otherwise, you can protect seeds and seedlings from deer and rodents by either digging in the pots to the ground level and covering them with wire mesh, or just grouping them together and covering the group with wire mesh. That way you're not cutting bits and pieces of wire mesh or screening. So the pros and cons of winter sown seed and container. It's high density, the infrastructure cost is quite low impact and small footprint as far as resources are concerned. Natural stratification and germination occur for most species. The ergonomics are good if you want to work up on a table to do all the planting and potting, move them around as needed, you can. It can be sheltered from extreme weather events. If you know terrible weather is coming in or a great windstorm, you can lay pots on their sides so they won't be blown over. Things like that are a little more convenient when managing containers. On the downside, they have greater watering needs. The wire mesh has some costs associated with it. You can use really anything you can find that has a small enough spacing to allow water through and light through, but not let rodents in. Seeds requiring long stratification or double dormancy may take up containers for 2 or 3 years. As I said, they're prone to wind damage from being tipped over, but if you stand them in groupings or, sort of in small communities, you can tie them together or, berm up soil around the outside of them to help keep them all together. The risk of root damage from freezing, there is some in the winter if they're not either dug in or insulated, depending on the hardiness of the species. So here's a picture of winter sowing and growing in a good size container. This is a large pot, roughly 30 centimeters across at the top and 22 centimeters deep, or 1 foot by 9 inches. These Bur Oaks were densely sown together for the winter. The acorns from the white oak family present with a radicle, so they grow a little radical late fall. And these seeds are really one that's best planted in the ground or large planters for winter stratification naturally. So you see the second picture from the left at the top shows the little tiny root coming out. That can happen very quickly in the fall in the right moisture conditions. They want to set their roots over the winter. They're going to send that root down into the ground, and then they're going to sleep the winter that way. And then the next spring, they will send up the top growth, which will be the first stem and leaves. By doing this in a pot and putting the wire over them for the winter, it really gives them the best conditions in a planter where they can be grown on for about a year in their original container throughout the whole next growing season without damaging or disturbing their young root systems. After that, they can be planted out into a field planting or like a traditional planting bed or out into sites because their root system is still quite compact, ready to grow on for the next spring. Here are some pictures of winter sowing in air pruning beds. A little about air pruning beds. These are basically very large planters with the bottoms open to the air. They can be lifted up on risers or bricks to allow for airflow below at the base of the pots. These ones are a little under 1 by 2 feet, and once filled with soil and seeds, they're still easily moved about. These boxes spend the winter on the ground to offer the best protection from rodents through the winter and keep them closest to soil temperature. And then in the spring, they will be lifted up onto pallets, 6 planters to a wooden pallet to allow for airflow under and around the boxes. These planters were constructed in the fall of 2021 from reclaimed cedar deck boards. While these deck boards didn't have the structural strength to continue to be a deck, they have lots of life left in them for many other non-load bearing projects. The high school environmental leadership program helped students at the WPC were invaluable assistants in making these. We teamed up with 20+ local students to build, fill, and plant these planters over a few different workshop days. The root structures and tap roots that are formed on many tree species can grow poorly when restricted by traditional pots, with the roots often spiraling around containers and eventually causing growth problems later in the life of the tree. By having the bottom of these planters open to the air, tap roots grow naturally downward until they encounter the air, when they are naturally pruned by the dehydrating flow of air, forcing young seedlings to grow and develop more fibrous and branched lateral root systems. This allows for less transplant shock and greater resilience when planting them out into the environment. By planting these densely, knowing that the seedlings will only be growing in them for a single growing season, we can manage a very large amount of seedlings in a compact space. This lets the species we've chosen to grow outcompete any unwanted seed material that may be present in our soil mixture. In 9 boxes, we planted a total of 450 walnut and bur oak, and we finished planting just before the winter holiday break. We'll be working with the HELP students again this spring to plant more seeds in the air pruning beds, mostly seeds that require specific germination treatments or spring soil temperatures. All right, so looking at artificial stratification, planting pre-treated seed in pots and containers. This is really best considered with tree and shrubs that need complex treatments. Excuse me. Choose a free draining and moisture retaining soil And label, always making sure to label things. You can reuse old planting pots, pop bottles, yogurt tubes, or make board boxes. And cold frames, again, can be a great way to protect seeds through the first few years in pots, or potted seeds can also later be planted into beds to overwinter or grow on for more years. The pros and cons of planting pre-treated seeds. Pros, you can do seeds with lots of complex stratification needs, thinking of the ones that need the boiling water treatment and then immediately want to germinate. Those are certainly ones that you're going to be planting pre-treated seed out in the spring. These can be planted with high or low density. If you have seeds that you don't have very many of that are special, whether you weren't able to get very many, or if you just ordered in a certain number and that was how many you have, you can plant them in low density, and then they do not have to suffer sort of the transplanting shock partway through their first growing season when they're divided out into separate pots or given more space. Ergonomics. Again, pots can easily be moved according to conditions and your preferences. They can be sheltered from extreme weather events, and seeds that require long stratification and double dormancy, they can do that 2-3 years of sort of, usually it's a warm, cold cycling, comfortably in very compact forms, sort of in your indoors, in a fridge, in and out of the fridge. The downsides of this, similar to most containers, they have significant watering needs and the risk of root damage if they're not properly dug in or insulated for the winter, and their risk of tipping over in windstorms. So seed growing resources. There's a long list of them here. Sarah will be sharing all of the resources in this slide on the chat for your use and enjoyment. I hope this has given you a start and the encouragement to be able to dive in and give your seeds the conditions they need to thrive. Whether you've collected seeds with permission or purchased them from one of Ontario's many seed suppliers, native species will often need some sort of treatment to ensure the best germination success. But most of these treatments are readily done at home, either working with existing sort of natural seasonality or making best use of the materials you have at hand. For other additional training and certifications, we also welcome you to make use of Reforest London's volunteer resources. As well, there's a host of information that can be found at the Forest Gene Conservation website. I've posted the QR codes here for Reforest London's site, as well as their link. They are also listed in the resources Sarah has posted to chat. Thank you so very much for coming out. You can ask questions in the chat about anything we covered today, or if you have specific questions about the treatment needs for a specific species or two, I've got all my resources at the ready to help out where I can and help us all get growing, even if it's still in the last cold, bright days of February. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon. So it looks like we do have a few questions coming in. First one is from Pat, asking, when you talk of seed cut tests, how would you do that? And say with blue beech seeds or tulip tree seeds, which are extremely small. Would you use an X-Acto type knife to be best?
Okay, so if you only have a very few seeds, so if you've only got, say, under 5 seeds, I would plant them all individually and not risk cutting a good seed and losing it out of a collection. If you're concerned about very, very small seeds, we generally don't cut anything smaller than 1 millimeter. I tend to use a scalpel, and then I've got a little tiny slide microscope. I'm pretty sure this one is from Lee Valley, and it is just a little pocket magnifier that has a light that can let me look inside it. But it is usually not critical. If they're very small seeds, they're typically broadcast over the surface of a pot, and what germinates, because it's likely that if you have small seeds, you have a lot of them in a very small area. For cutting bigger seeds like acorns, pruners, or secateurs, you very carefully hold the seed, staying clear of the blades to cut it open. And if you can't do it safely, don't do it. It's better for it to be a mystery than for you to be injured.
We have one from Keith. He asks, is the FGCA Certified Seed Collector Program aimed at people who would do seed collecting full time?
Absolutely, yes. In 2018, the Ontario tree seed plant closed, leaving the seed collections to be managed sort of locally by nurseries. Forest Gene Conservation Association has stepped in to offer the training so that the seed that's being collected for the trees that are being planted in Ontario's nurseries and restoration projects can be done so in sort of a formalized and everyone ideally receiving a similar training. So they're focused on that as, I should correct, as a full-time thing. I'm not sure it could be a full-time job. I guess it depends how busy you are during certain seasons. Seed collection is really, you have a lot of work to be done in the spring in forecasting, and then a very, very busy season in the fall. So whether it could be a full-time job is a question for some of the professionals. I suspect it is usually done as a part-time position.
Right. And from Keith again, do you have any other resources on air pruning beds?
We don't have any others recorded, although we'll send the notes and the pictures. If you want the design sheet, when we were making them up with the students, we've got the schematics all done up nicely of how we made them using the materials we had to hand, but it'll give you a really good start on the size and scale. If you're willing to explore around YouTube, if you type in air pruning bed, there are many good folks with nicer videos than mine, better production values, who have them out there to watch and review different ways and different people managing them in sort of different climate zones too. Oh, you're most welcome.
We've still got some more time for questions if anyone has them. Also, feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask them live if you would rather. All right. So if no one has any more questions, just before we all send you off, I would invite you to please scan the QR code here and take time to fill out our survey. Your voice really matters, and we help use your responses to improve our programming and webinars for the future. And thank you all for coming out. Please free, you can head back if you have any more questions. We cut you off a little bit too early, but thank you again for coming. Please enjoy your Sunday, and we hope that we see you all for Seeds 103.
Thank you all.
Awesome. Yeah, that went really well.
All right.
Quite their attention to 12 people, more than last time. I think I saw almost everybody who was there the first time come back.
Yeah, I mean, that's good news. So we got some passionate people. We'll keep that list of names handy when we start doing events.
Yeah.
Hey guys, we're doing some events.
No, that was great.
Good. Good. I'm good. I always feel so awkward doing these. I hope it goes off all right.
No, I think that was great. Attentive, move quickly was good.
Yeah. You see what I meant about like the pros and cons slides? I'm like, there's not a lot going on here, but I kind of want to let people know about the reasons why you might like want to go all in on one or not on the other. You know, if you can't be there to water your plants every 5 minutes, might I recommend you plant a seed bed so Mother Nature can do most of it for you. But
No, it was thorough. I enjoyed that part.
good. Well, that's a wrap for today.